Larry, welcome to the show.
Greg, thanks so much for having me.
I'll put you on the spot, Larry. What is innovation?
Invention is doing something differently. The difference between innovation and invention is innovation, you don't just invent it, you actually turn that invention into something real that creates value. And a good example, there's a lot of people like Al Gore who say they invented the internet, but there's probably only a very small number of people who actually did anything about it, which is why you and I are able to have this call over the internet today.
Okay. So you've come back to Australia, you've had a big role of late. What's the current state of innovation or invention in Australia?
Yeah, look, our invention system is fantastic. We're global top 10 for science, but we're somewhere between 82nd and maybe a bit worse for our innovation, our ability to turn our great science into real tangible value that drives jobs and economic prosperity. And a good example of that, you know that the solar cell design that's used around the world today was actually invented here in Australia. That particular design was invented here. But that whole industry is pretty much controlled by China because China was willing to put up a lot of capital to invest in creating that industry more than 20 years ago, and we kind of stopped at inventing it.
So if you're going to sort of stand back, Larry, what does need to be done to, I guess, incentivize, boost innovation? Have we got enough private equity, or is it going to be more government? You lived in the States, you've seen what it's like. So how do we compete?
Yeah, look, Australia is quite a bit different, of course, to the US, to Silicon Valley. But you know, a big reason why I sort of stepped into CSIRO was I spent most of my career wrestling with Australia's innovation dilemma. You know, our challenge, our difficulty in turning our great inventions into real value. Probably more than a decade ago, our venture capital was pretty thin on the ground. I was managing director of one of the bigger funds back then.
Yep.
But there weren't too many of us, and most of the VCs were fairly risk averse, so shallow pool of capital and fairly risk averse. And the financial institutions, the super funds, weren't really willing to invest in venture capital, so we're pretty weak. But a lot of things changed. You know, the government created the NISA agenda under Malcolm. The interest rates went to an all-time low, so the superannuation funds were looking for other places to invest their money. So there was sort of a convergence of things, which meant venture capital ballooned. It's probably bloated. It's probably grown at least 3 times in the total amount of capital that there was 10 years ago, and probably 10 times the number of firms. So I don't think that's our problem anymore. I think there's plenty of capital around, but we still confuse invention for innovation, for the creation of value.
So for the VC or the PE house out there, are they getting the returns on their investment then in Australia?
Mate, we founded Blackbird in 2012, and it's running over 10 billion in capital today, by far the most, I think, ever. And its return on Fund 1, probably about 37 times multiple. Very small fund. It was only a $30 million fund, and we were flat out to raise that. But it invested in Canva. It was one of the first investors in Canva, safety culture, and so on. So it's going to be it'll knock the lights out. It's a matter of whether that can be sustained into the future. You know, Greg, what's happened in the past with venture capital, we're on our 3rd wave of VC in Australia, and the previous 2 waves kind of dried up when the superannuation funds and the banks didn't really feel like investing in them.
Okay.
So I think the big question now, you know, there's always a financial crisis that happened, like after the GFC, the big funds pulled out. My gut is there'll be a bit of attrition in the venture capital industry. We'll see a big reduction in the number of funds. But I think some will survive and some will continue to deliver, and I'm really hopeful Blackbird will be one of them.
So what actually is future made in Australia? What's that policy really all about? I see it put out there, but is there anyone taking it seriously?
Mate, so the reason I've been wrestling this innovation dilemma, Australia's innovation dilemma, for 30 years is I actually believe in that policy. I think there is a future made in Australia, but only if we really do something we've never been comfortable to do before, and basically pick winners. And government doesn't have a great track record of picking winners, and some venture funds do. Some of the superannuation funds, like the Future Fund and Host Plus, they have a great record of picking winners. So I think there's an opportunity for Future Made in Australia to work, but only in a small number of markets and opportunities where Australia's got a really strong unfair advantage.
Thanks for watching the No Limitations podcast, brought to you by Blenheim Partners, board and executive search firm. As a trusted advisor, we work with Australian listed groups, multinational corporations, large private companies, and social impact organisations on their most critical people choices to drive change, prepare for growth, and outperform their peers. To learn more about Blenheim Partners and executive search, visit our website, blenheimpartners.com. And now, back to the show. So, Larry, how do you pick winners? They don't come knocking. Do they come knocking on your door? It's a referral. You're scanning the market all day long. Look, what's the process behind it?
Yeah, no. So, mate. One of the biggest lessons I got out of being in Silicon Valley was this thing that I call market vision. It's not a great name, but I don't know what else to call it. But when I first went to the Valley, I was a bit intimidated. I thought, oh, these guys must be the best inventors in the world, and they're fantastic. But then again, so are Australians, and there's plenty of evidence. There's been plenty of Aussies who've gone over there and been very successful. So clearly, we're able to do it. But the thing that I learned in the Valley was they have this way of looking at the market, at the future, that we generally don't see in this country, and it really is. It's not like having a bold vision or a speech or a bunch of rhetoric. But they study the market, they figure out where it's going to go, and then they ask the question, well, how could we disrupt that market? How could we make it go over here instead of over there? And what product could we create that would force it to do that, would make the market want to go somewhere different? And why do they do that? Because if they can move the market, then they're the only game in town. They've got the only product that wins. And you've seen that with Google. There were 100 search engine companies.
That's right, yeah.
But Google moved the market. Intel moved the market. Hewlett-Packard moved the market by creating something that no one expected or people didn't even think was possible. They're the kind of things that we need to do, and you can't do too many of them, Greg. They're very hard to do. So I think Australia got a really good opportunity in resources, and if we're smart and pick some key points on the global value chain, I think we could own those points. I don't think we could own the whole thing, but I think we could own some really critical pieces on the global value chain. And it's that kind of venture capital thinking that I think government needs to be doing in order to make Made in Australia real. And I'll be honest with you, we as a country, we don't have a great track record at doing that.
No, okay.
As a government.
No, we don't. So just go back to what you said. You're going to pick some particular points on the chain there. What points are you going to be picking in that resource play?
Look, I think clearly, so the biggest market shift we're seeing in the world now is the shift to net zero. It's a massive, that'll be the biggest, up until now, the creation of the internet was probably the biggest market shift that we'd lived through. I think the energy transition will be way bigger. It'll dwarf even the internet. I think it's that massive. And there's some wicked hard problems to solve. For example, decarbonizing a mining company, that's one of the hardest industries to decarbonize. And yet Australia is fantastic at mining. Our mining companies are right at the cutting edge of technology. They use AI, they use quantum. They didn't need to be told about it. They went hunting for it. They're really right on the cutting edge of innovation. And so you've got that going for us. You've also got the fact that, the energy transition needs, new materials. It needs a whole new supply chain for electronics, because the electronics that we're familiar with that go into a mobile phone,
yes,
right, they're low power, low energy, very efficient. To do energy, large energy, megawatts, gigawatts, terawatts, you need a whole different set of materials in order to switch and control and network all of that energy. That's a whole market that's waiting to be invented. And Australia, if we can control the raw materials, the critical materials that enable that market, then I think we've got a good shot of doing more than just supplying the commodity. I think we could add value to those raw materials and make them power switches, power network devices, that kind of technology. So I think that's a really good example of where we could play smart and build some part of it in Australia. Again, we wouldn't do it all. But we might, instead of just shipping a commodity, we might ship a core component, something that's maybe 10 times more profitable than the commodity, so we can grow our market and leverage our smarts.
So have we got the R&D investment to do this, Larry? And have we got the R&D pipeline in terms of people coming through?
Yeah, so we're global top 10 for the quality of our science. So we compete on the world stage. If you look at the numbers, we might be slightly behind as a percentage of GDP, say the US. The US probably invests a greater percentage than we do, but it's not night and day. We're a little bit undercooked maybe, but I think the real opportunity for us, and this is what we found in CSIRO. CSIRO people used to complain about not getting enough funding from the government, and today, most of the money that funds CSIRO's research, the real cutting edge stuff, actually doesn't come from the government. It comes from the value that we created over the last sort of decade by turning our inventions into innovations and capturing that value. So I think that's the opportunity for the research sector. Not necessarily expecting the government to fund it, but coming up with better ways to create value from their genius.
And going back to Future Made in Australia policy, i.e. government policy, how much are they investing?
In that, I don't know the exact numbers.
And where does it sit? And who gets access to it? Yeah,
I take your point. So there's the National Reconstruction Fund. That's about 15 billion. There's ARENA. I can't remember the number for that, but it's in the billions. It's significant. But yeah, I think if you put your arms around all of it, it would be significant. But obviously, it wouldn't be anywhere near what the US or China are investing. But they're 20 times bigger than we are as a country anyway. Okay,
but do you trust government to make the right calls then, based on what you said a few minutes ago, for that money, which is our taxpayers' money?
Yeah, look, mate, I think that's definitely a combination of, if it was me, go to the smartest people. Like the Future Fund has a phenomenal futures team, as you'd expect.
Yes.
Hostplus and some of the other big superannuation funds have very good futures teams. Actually, and to be fair, the Office of National Intelligence has a phenomenal futures capability as well. So we do have that capability, but we haven't used it that way before. And if you look at China's success, 25 years ago, saying, what, we think solar is going to be really important. We are going to throw a lot of money out. We're going to build that market, and today they own it. Similar with lithium batteries. The US did that with computing back in the day, and from military research to computing. So I think most countries have learned that you've got to be a bit more strategic about where you invest your money and kind of pick where you can win.
Okay, so have we got someone overseeing this, Larry, properly? I guess that's where I'm coming from. It sounds great as a slogan, and I agree with you. It'd be great to do it, but who's leading it, and who's calling out which one's the back, or do they have the pedigree to do it?
Yeah, I think, the thing that has really made me feel more positive since leaving CSIRO, and CSIRO is not government. It's very close to government, but it's a separate organisation with its own board and all that sort of thing. But I think the thing I've seen, I've talked to a lot of investors in super funds and the like since I left, and they really are hungry to learn this particular way of thinking. So I guess I'm seeing industry stand up and do maybe what government can't, which is great.
Okay, all right. Now, you studied physics at university.
I did.
Okay. And you decided to go to CSIRO as a young man, did you?
Yeah, so Kathy Foley was at Macquarie where I started, and she had gone to CSIRO, and I liked Kathy a lot. So I went and did a summer internship there just to learn to see a big lab. And I went to this place in Linfield that looks like something from an old Soviet era bomb shelter, huge, big concrete bunkers, and people, mostly blokes, walking around with, white shirts and ties, not too many suits, but certainly lots of white shirts and ties. So it was a real eye opener for a student wearing jeans and a t-shirt. So I had to clean up my act a little bit to work in there. But gee, I learned a lot from them. Amazing organisation.
Did Mum and Dad have a pedigree in science?
No, but they really encouraged me. My dad really encouraged me from a very early age to learn how things worked, and he was always pulling things apart. He used to do a lot of electrical work, a lot of electrical repairs, and the one rule that I had with him, I could take anything apart as long as I put it back together, and I learned pretty quickly it takes a lot longer to put it back together. But gee, you learn a lot, Greg.
Fair enough. Now, you completed a PhD in Nonlinear Optics. All right, for those out there who haven't got a clue what that means, what does it mean?
Yeah, so it's to do with lasers and light.
Yep.
So a flashlight is linear optics. A laser is a non-linear thing. It uses light exponentially. So you can't shine a flashlight to the moon, but you can shine a laser to the moon. So you can put a lot of energy into it. It can go a lot further, and you can do things with it like optical communications. The backbone of the internet is because of nonlinear optics and lasers that works.
So the state of science, state of innovation, state of atmosphere and creativity in those days compared to now, Larry?
Yeah, look, in Australia back then, in a uni, I'd never heard of Silicon Valley. I'd never heard of innovation. When I heard innovation, I thought that was science and invention and writing a paper, and that was very much the way we were taught. And as a fairly smart undergrad and then a postgrad, the professors really strongly encouraged us to go get what's called a postdoc at a prestigious university, Oxford or Cambridge or Stanford. And then one day we might actually be able to be a professor like them. And it was all about that academic aspiration. And that is, I think the reason that our science excellence in Australia is global top 10, because our academics are very, very good. And our ability to create more academics and do great research is in the global top 10, we're sort of global best. But, when you go to other countries, particularly to Silicon Valley or Israel, Norway, Sweden, take your pick.
Yes.
They think about science and invention and innovation a little bit differently. And that's probably what I learned in going to Stanford.
Well, how do they think in that regard? Because
yeah. So I met this guy, Jim Collins, at Stanford, and he was in the business school when I was using the equipment in the Ginston lab in the physics school. And Bob Beyer, who became my PhD examiner, Bob said, "Larry, while you're here, you should just go, Jim won't mind, just go and sit in a couple of his business courses and see if you can learn something about business. It'll be useful for you."
Good to great, eh?
Yeah, well, that's right. Yeah. He hadn't written that. He wasn't famous then, but he was just as smart, brilliant, actually. And there was another guy that I met later at Stanford, Steve Blank, and he was developing a great theory about how to rapidly iterate products in order to get your market vision right, figure out if your market vision's right, and then use the product and the interaction with the customer to keep tweaking your market vision until you got it right, till you nailed it. And he became quite famous probably a decade later as well. But what I learned, really was that every other kid that I met in those business courses was at Stanford to learn how to start a company. And the kids in the science lab, they weren't necessarily there to start a company, but they sure were going to do something big, either in a startup or join a company. So it really was transformational for me to see that kind of culture because I hadn't seen anything like that in Australia.
So that's science making money, science changing the world, was it? Was it sort of bringing it to reality, was it?
I think really it's science changing the world, because, back then, and I think even now, like the internet, the backbone of the internet, was created by Cisco, big successful company. But Cisco was founded by two Stanford professors, a husband and wife, and they, I don't think, were ever trying to make money, but they were trying to change the world. They were trying to create the internet. They could see it. Their market vision was spot on. They when people were saying, "Oh no, copper cable, DSL, the big telcos, we're physically connected to the customer by a wire. We're never going to disrupt that, because that means we own them. We have a monopoly." And the Cisco founders said, "Well, we think the customer should be free, so we're going to disrupt that. We're going to create this whole new model." And ironically, the telcos managed to leverage the creation of the optical fiber communication. They managed to leverage that in the existing model until CSIRO invented Wi-Fi. And then Cisco bought the Wi-Fi invention, and that really cut the cord. That really did free everybody in a way that enabled Apple then to completely reinvent the phone industry, for a computer company to come out of left field and beat Nokia, know. So this is the kind of the way people in Silicon Valley think. If you ask the founders of Cisco, or you ask Steve about this,
yes,
he would have told you this vision 10 years earlier. I know, because he told me, but he had this vision 10 years earlier, and it stuns me to see how precisely he was able to make that vision become real. Like his market vision, he was probably the best person in the world I've ever seen for having a market vision and actually figuring out how to make it real, and seeing the value of technology and inventions to create that vision.
Just on that, how did he do it? And look, if we could bottle that, we'd all be billionaires. But how did he do it, Larry? Like, was it from just relentless insight from customers, or no, I'm going to be bringing the customer to me because the customer doesn't really know what they want? Like, what? And it's a big differentiator. It's a make or break too, obviously. So how did he make?
It is the secret sauce behind every successful startup. And when Valley VCs, sort of old school Silicon Valley, the VC is always looking at, the secret sauce. What's the magic ingredient in this startup that's going to make it more successful than all the others? And it's usually three things. It's that market vision that nailed. They've really got it. It's some kind of technology, something that other people don't have. That's always nice to have. It's not critical. Like, Uber didn't have magic technology, but they did have a very disruptive idea. But generally, the companies I do as a scientist, as a physicist, have some secret sauce. I like to see that. And then the personality, the humans, the team, is this a team that's going to give up at the first sort of sign of trouble, or are they going to walk through fire to be successful? And if you see those three things, it's a pretty potent combination. And to tell you how Steve did it, so, years ago I did a project for Steve, and he wanted, so this didn't exist yet, right? The phone. He'd done the iPod, and he had this in secret development, but nobody knew about it. And he funded my little startup, Lightbit, to build a laser that could project three colors and make an image. And it had a ridiculously low power budget. It had it was impossible, right? We built one, but it was impossible. Like you could never make it for the price point that you would need for it to be successful in an iPhone, right? But the reason he built it is, in his market vision, computers were going to go away and everything would be virtual. And he imagined a future where you sat your iPhone on a desk and it beamed a keyboard and it beamed a screen, and it was as small as possible, and you had essentially a laptop in this. And it is brilliant, and just the economics couldn't work. But if you think about it, he found another way to create that, because this is a laptop in the palm of your hand. And voice to get rid of the keyboard. And he used so that he was amazing. I can tell you all 6 of my startups only succeeded because they had the right market vision, but they never started with it.
So the market vision is the point of difference to the consumer. Is that your market vision?
Yeah.
Is that right or not?
Maybe I'll give you another example because it is a bit nebulous. So example is a good way to explain it. So years ago, I invented this thing called the eye-safe laser, right? And it was a laser that used nonlinear optics to make it operate in a wavelength that could go into your eye and then be absorbed by the fluid in your eye. So it couldn't get to your retina. And that meant you could run 10,000 times more power in the air, in public, and you wouldn't be at risk of blinding anyone. And the standards bodies basically signed off that this is an eye-safe laser. So that was a really enabling thing because it meant you could do laser radar, it meant you could do supermarket scanners, it meant you could do all this stuff that you couldn't do before because of the hazard, the safety risk. And what did I learn from that, Greg? Because we failed to commercialize that in any meaningful way. We did a laser for curing blindness in premature babies. Wow. It's a very noble product. It was amazing, actually, amazing product. And it made us beloved in the ophthalmic industry, but it's a tiny market. So it didn't, you couldn't build a company on it, but we felt good. And remember, we're scientists and engineers. We're doing it because we want to change the world. But what did I learn? Because in the process of figuring that out, we built a stereolithography machine. That's rapid prototyping, 3D printing. We built one of the first ones of them. We built a LiDAR system for a car, right? A laser that could navigate a car. Right. Now, like that's ever going to be useful, right? And of course, bear in mind, this was in the 1990s, right? Yeah, so none of these things became useful until probably 20 years later. So they're a bit too, those market visions, they're a bit too far out there.
Okay.
They're a bit too far into the future. The magic that Steve had is he could see the future, but he could figure out when it would work. And he lined up his innovations to deliver at the point where the market was ready for it, where he could win. And often scientists and technologists, we create these things called technology platforms. Technology platform is something like a semiconductor chip, right? It enables a lot of things. There's 1,000,001 things you can do with it. And that's the problem. Because to be successful as a startup, you don't want to do 1,000,001 things. You want to do one thing, and you want to do one thing better than anybody else. And it's that one thing that makes you successful. So platforms are wonderful. They're valuable, but they can be a huge distraction. And the market vision is the thing that tells you of the 1,000 things I could do, what's the one that's going to make a company? And if you get that one right, you're successful.
So when did you wake up and make that big call? I'm no longer going to be, or I'm not going to pursue academia. I'm going to pursue business. I remember growing up as a kid watching Julia Sumner Miller.
Me too.
I was wondering, the old egg in the bottle and the paper and being lit up and everything else, right? I thought, okay, I don't think I want to do that in my life, but was something like that for yourself?
Oh, huge, yeah. Julia Sumner Miller. I was very young. It was black and white television.
That's right.
I might have been 5 years old, right?
Yeah.
But I was so blown away by that character. And there are still professors at University of Sydney, ANU, Macquarie that have that magic. So my PhD professor was this guy, Jim Piper. Jim sadly passed away, actually, just last year. But Jim was amazing. He had the love of science and physics. He could really inspire you. But Jim had something else that's very rare. He understood that there's sort of an obligation of a scientist to change the world. So he did a lot of reaching out to try and work with industry to do things. And that's probably the first time I saw that happening for real in Australia. And the challenge back then was Australian industry was very reluctant to take risk on science. In general, they'd rather buy it from the US or Europe than try to do it here. And that's the other half of our problem, really. It's the reason that the two don't often get together. And I sort of think of that as the valley of death that separates, great science and invention from great business. That valley is probably wider and deeper in Australia than it is in most other countries, which is why, we're 82nd or however you want to measure it in the world for innovation, but top 10 for invention.
But somewhere along there, you decided to cross the valley of death.
Yeah, so I thought about that. I spent most of my career in the valley of death, actually, because, it takes a while to get across it. And I've crossed it. I've crossed it 6 times successfully.
And no compass, I guess.
There's no compass, no. But your market vision is your compass. And Greg, it's funny, but every one of those ideas failed in order for it to become successful. It's only when you're halfway across the valley of death and you're running out of food and water, or in the startup's case, you can see you're going to run out of money at the end of the quarter. Mate, running out of money at the end of the quarter is a marvelous motivator. I mean, there's nothing gets you focused like that kind of crisis. And I sort of, the first time it happened, I thought, oh, geez, this is not much fun. But we got through. The second time it happened, I thought, oh, it's still not much fun, but I know what to do. After the third time, I thought, hang on, I'm seeing a pattern here. And after the 6th time, I'm absolutely convinced that a startup has to have a near-death experience in order for it to be successful. And what's happening when you see that is the market vision is probably right at a high level, but you've missed something. You've got something not quite right, and it's not working. And facing that failure point makes you really look hard at hold the mirror up at yourself, look really hard at what have I missed? What have I got wrong? And it's that process where you iterate and you change the product a little bit, you change your vision a little bit, and that's what usually nails it. Is that crisis makes you change. And I mentioned Steve Blank before. So Steve realized this. When you know how internet companies do A/B testing. So they put up a website and they may change the font and the color they may change 100 things a day in the website, just little micro tweaks. And they measure the data and they're iterating the product to optimize it, to get a better return, to get better revenue, get better sales. And you can do that iteration in digital companies really, really efficiently. What they're doing when they're doing that tweaking is they're tweaking their market vision. They're learning about the market and they're changing their trajectory. They're changing their vision. Now, imagine trying to do that with a hardware company, right? Like, mate, when we did the medical lab, when we did Iridex, you used to have to design the product, and then it took 6 months to get the plastics made, the injection molding, the PC boards, all you had to test it. So you're looking at a year to iterate a physical product. So the reason market vision is so important is you don't have that year. So you've got to design the product in your head, and then go test it with the market. And when you've got the product in the market, you've got to get the data from it to tell you what you got wrong, so you can keep iterating it, keep making it better until you eventually nail it. And when you do nail it, nobody, like your competitors, fall far behind. If there were any to start with, I always like companies where you were the first. You created it. You had no competitors, although they were chasing you, because it's a lot easier to be successful when that happens. But that's the reason market vision is so important. This ability to keep reading the market, keep understanding it, and your customers are part of that story. They can tell you what they know, but they can't tell you what product to build. So they're part of the solution, but it's more than that. It's how you analyze the market. It's how you look into the future. It's how you think. And Apple had this saying, think different. Innovators are people who think really, really differently about the future. They can see a future that other people can't. but then they're able to go really deep and into detail to figure out how to make it happen. And that's what a real entrepreneur does. You know, they're not out giving speeches. They're not on the stage being a celebrity. They're learning the market, and then they're doing the hard yards to actually figure out how to make it happen.
How are you dealing with the investors then when they think, terrific market pitch, I've got you, but it's been 12 months, Larry. We haven't seen it come good yet, and you're now giving me another reason why you need more time. How do you go with that?
Yeah. So another secret of Silicon Valley. So in the 80s and 90s, the way Silicon Valley VCs invested. So I saw a lot of VCs when I was at Stanford. They used to come down to Stanford all the time to look at what's on the lab bench. And sometimes it was just to learn, but usually they were looking for something, you know. And my first company, I didn't understand venture capital at all. My second company actually happened because a VC came to me with a market vision. And he was trying to understand where telecom was going, and he had this theory, and we worked together to go figure it out. And we actually licensed a technology from Stanford that we thought could make this market vision real. And Greg, that sort of deal creation, most of the great Silicon Valley companies have some kind of history like that. So, for example, PayPal, right? Peter Thiel and those five guys, including Elon, had a brilliant idea, but that wasn't PayPal. The brilliant idea of PayPal was a VC who got in early with them, didn't invest money, but invested a lot of time. And one day they were having a meeting, and he said, "Hey, I think we got it all wrong. Why don't we just email money?"
Yeah, right.
And the brilliant insight, think of money as an email, you know, came from the VC. So that's a good example of deal creation. The two founders of Cisco, similar. VC said, "I thought this internet could be really big. What could we do to move it along?" It got them thinking. The beauty of that sort of deal creation model is that if you're part of the team as a VC with the founder, you learn to trust each other pretty quick. You learn not to bullshit each other, and you're doing your due diligence while you're creating the company. And sometimes that might go on for a year. And then when it comes time to, the VC will tell you, right, we need $20 million to fund this company. I'm going to give you 10, and I'm going to introduce you to 3 other VCs who I know, and they're going to give you the other 10, and then let's get going. And it's a harder process in the beginning because you don't have any money. But I'll tell you what, when you get to that fundraising point, the fundraising goes quickly, the trust around the board table goes better, and the investors are part of the team then. So it's a very different paradigm to me coming to you with a pitch and you not trusting me, and how am I going to figure out whether you're telling the truth or not? It's a completely different dynamic, and I think the best startups have that sort of similar story as well.
And of the 6 startups you did, Larry, what percentage of those team members made it all the way through? What do we got to think about? You're starting up, you're all shaking hands, we're all super excited, and we got the dream. How many of us actually still standing at the end of the day?
Yeah, so my very first one, my co-founder got really sick, and actually it's the reason I became a CEO. I never wanted to be a CEO, but my co-founder got really ill, and I kind of had to look after him, and he had a family, so it was really tough. So he said, "You got to take over, or I can't work anymore." And so we had to eventually. That's the reason we ended up selling that company we merged that company with another company in order to get more capital. But I had a couple of years as a CEO, untrained, to get us there. So Dan, my co-founder, and all of the people that invested in that company, they all came all the way through to the IPO of Iridex. Dan couldn't work.
Yeah, okay.
But he kept his equity all the way through, as did all the other investors. So when I did, pretty much, if you look at the teams of the 6 startups, you often see the same people. So I had the same CFO for 3 of them.
Okay.
I had the same CTO for 2 of them. You kind of get to know them. And they get to trust you because you've delivered before. I did lose one CTO from Stanford actually because he didn't tell the truth about the technology, and that was a really interesting one actually. When we discovered that he kind of had hidden the truth about this technology and there was a fatal flaw in it, I had to go back to the VCs and offer to give them the money back because we should have known about this and we didn't, and I didn't want them to feel like we'd lied to them. So, and that was a really interesting one as well, Greg, because then they didn't want the money back. It was kind of it was a weird thing. It wasn't a test, but it actually made them trust us more, I think, rather than less. So, and that was important because that company went through the telecom bust, and it went through and came out, and we were still able to exit it despite it being the worst time we'd ever seen in the market.
And when you're doing your selection, Larry, is first part of it, I've got to commit and put money in, or I've just got to commit to get an outcome, and you're going to give me equity? How do you structure it? Or does it change from deal to deal?
Mate, I never liked people to have too much financial risk in a startup.
Okay.
Because one of the things that happens in startups, they do well to begin with, and then let's say they get to 10 million in revenue, they might be break even at that point, and then they have something to lose. And you don't want the team thinking, shit, I've got my house is mortgaged to fund this thing. I don't want to take too much risk, and it makes them conservative. So a little bit of skin in the game is good,
okay,
but not too much, because you want them. When a company's small, you really want to be risking the company pretty much all the time in order to grow it. You want them right on the cutting edge, and as a board and an investor, you're sitting there providing the kind of adult supervision to say, no, that's too big a risk. And I can tell you, generally, you're egging them on to take more risk, because human nature is that they don't want to fail, they don't want to let you down, and if you don't push the envelope, and if you're not unreasonable as an investor, then companies can sort of plateau. So yeah, not too much personal risk for them.
So what's it like, Larry, in Silicon Valley? Is it really a separate world compared to what you seem to get back here? Like just the level of ideas going backwards and forwards, people turning up to universities, people trying things, people blowing money, people dusting themselves off?
Yeah. Mate, so look, I loved my time there, but there was a point in 2000, just in the lead up to the tech wreck in 2000, the VC community in the Valley tripled in size. And it got a lot of East Coast bankers. It got a lot of sort of financial engineers. Got a lot of the stockbrokers. A lot of that kind of I don't know. I'm going to be disparaging. It kind of lost its, because Valley was always small, and usually VCs were people who had been entrepreneurs, so they had felt your pain. And they are by far my favorite, because they know they feel your pain, but they can also help you because, they've been there. After the tech wreck, most of the bankers sort of fled the Valley again, and it kind of got good again for a while. And the clean tech revolution happened in about 2003. And that again was back to old school venture investing, hands-on, real practitioners doing it. And then the clean tech bubble started to go. And so you got the banker infusion again. That was by 2007. And then, of course, you had the GFC. So at that point, I was thinking, okay, so when I see the bankers come into the Valley, it's time to leave, right? But we saw that again with the beginnings of artificial intelligence. And, you kind of got to the peak of the hype cycle. And that's about the time that I decided I wanted my kids, who are Americans, they're Californians, I wanted them to actually experience the Australian culture and live here. So, I moved them at a point. Maria and I, my wife, wanted to move them just as they're going into high school, and so now they're citizens of both countries. They've lived in both places. So it's an amazing place. But Australia should never aspire to become Silicon Valley.
I was going to ask you that. Do we have a Silicon Valley, or are we going to build one? Or I see we're building Redfern, we're building Central or whatever, but what is that? Anyway, going to be comparable, or what is it? What are we trying to achieve?
No, I think there's only one Silicon Valley. Israel might be a close second. They're pretty amazing. I don't think we need to do that. We're a very different kind of economy, a very different kind of culture. But we can certainly learn from them. And I think we can create an innovation system that is probably every bit as good, not as big, but every bit as good for the few areas that we really have an opportunity to be unique in globally. And Greg, that might be, as I said, materials and resources. It might be certain aspects of medical and health.
Yep.
We're phenomenal in that. Australia invests more money into medical research than all other research combined. So it's a focus area. And we've built some big companies there like CSL and Cochlear and so on. So, we clearly have a win. I'm on the board of a smaller one, Nanosonics, and it's a fabulous example, I think, of what we could do as a country. Nan is interesting. Their founder had a market vision that, and you got to laugh, when we go and have that procedure that men don't like to talk about every 2 years, in most countries, it's not believed that that device needs to be that clean.
All right.
I know, it's a worry, isn't it? So I'm going back 10 years, right? So the founder of Nanosonics said, I don't feel real good about that. I think I want to know that it's really clean. And so he and the team invented a machine that sterilizes those types of devices. It technically doesn't sterilize them. That's a medical term, but it makes them very clean. And they made this product that does this automatically, and they're the only company in the world that did it. And so they now do about 170-ish million in revenue.
Yep.
They went public. They're worth a couple of billion. Australian company, kind of a bit like Cochlear, going out with a product that nobody expected because their market vision was spot on. So we can do it. And I'd love to see 10 of them. I reckon we could do that. The other area I think we could be really strong in, and we are, is agriculture. So in the same way that our mineral resources, we're really good at that, Australia, it's the most arid country on the planet. So we're able to grow food with very little water. We're very smart with our genetics. I think there's a real opportunity to create, again, not food as a commodity, but really unique high-value food products that combine, safety, health, and food security at a very high margin. So I reckon if we do those three areas, I'd be pretty happy, and I think our economy would grow pretty strongly.
I agree. Hey, Larry, just quick one. Just looking back in your days at Silicon Valley, was it 26 years all up? What was the biggest success? So I did see you did IPO on NASDAQ. Was that success? Or was it actually shaking your hands with some of your best friends to say we pulled it off?
So I've got thousands of letters from family of people whose eyesight we saved with green laser that cured blindness in diabetics. And I think if you asked anyone in that company, they'd say the same thing. That's the thing that we're most proud of, because there's nothing like that feeling that you solved a problem and a lot of people really cared about it and benefited from it.
I'm not going to disagree with that one, Larry. That lasts forever, doesn't it?
It sure does. And mate, we had a bit of that in CSIRO because, the whole reason I did CSIRO was
I'm just about to jump there. I'm just about to jump there, Larry. Well, you came back to Australia. What did you have in mind?
So I pitched Simon McKeon. So a friend of mine sent me the ad for the CEO role at CSIRO, and I called the recruiter and he said, "Oh, look, we're late in the process, and we don't know who you are, but we'll do an interview anyway." Anyway, long story short, the interview went pretty well, and then I had a phone call with Simon McKeon, and Simon said, "Look, I'll be willing. You come down. You have to pay. We're not going to pay to fly you down, but if you're willing to come down and meet us, we'll do that." So I'm like, "Yeah, okay," I did that, and I basically pitched him the idea. Again, as I said, I've 30 years trying to crack the innovation dilemma for Australia. And so I had to explain to him that problem. And then I said, I think CSIRO could be the lever, could be the catalyst that changes it. And he got very excited because Simon was a guy at Macquarie Bank, and he didn't use the term market vision, but the way he invested was in things that could change the market. Yep. So he understood when I talked about it. So I went to a board meeting. I spent a lot of time with our board talking about what I thought what CSIRO could become. And then they said, look, the reality, Larry, is it's been shrinking for 30 years. It's got a bit of a public service culture. It's a bit browbeaten, and it doesn't have enough money. So how are you going to fix that? I'm like, well, it's great at inventing things, so there's got to be a way. Anyway, long story short, we did change the culture. We did change the way CSIRO did things. And, I got a lot of stick from politicians, particularly Labor and the Greens, and a lot of stick from the media, particularly the left-leaning media, because they said, oh, you're trying to wickedly commercialize this wonderful public good science. And the truth is, I might have done a little bit of that.
Yeah, but what's wrong with that either?
Yeah. But what did I really do? What did we really do? We needed more funding. We needed more money to turn around the decline.
Yep.
So we started taking equity in the things that we span out rather than just spinning them out. We started a venture fund. We started investing in some of these things ourselves so that when we were right and we had the right market vision, we would get an enduring benefit. And so we did that. But what did we really do? We really said, it's not good enough just to invent anymore. We've got to start not with the brilliant science. We don't want to lose the brilliant science, but that can't be all we do. And what we're going to do different going forward is we're going to go out into Australia and we're going to figure out what are the big problems that Australia needs to face, like getting to net zero, like dealing with climate change, like the fact that China and the US are inventing all the technology and we're not. How are we going to navigate that? What are we going to invest in that's going to give us some unique advantage? So basically we did what I said. We invested in health, we invested in medical technology, we invested in agriculture, we invested in resources and materials, those areas. And we actually wrote a market vision for Australia, and that's what directed our investments. And, in terms of that market vision working, one of the things we predicted in the market vision was some kind of disease X, either a pandemic or a superbug or antimicrobial resistance, but we predicted that things were going to get bad at some point in the future.
You're right.
So in 2016, we invested quite heavily in creating the capability to deal with such a disease. And 4 years later, when COVID hit, we were already working with the team at Oxford. We were already working with the UN around vaccines. And so we were able to start to manufacture vaccines in Australia. And then we work with CSL to help them mass produce Australia's first vaccine. That's a great example of market vision working. Now, we didn't know COVID was going to happen, but we, on balance of probabilities, we predicted that something like that was going to happen in the next sort of 10 to 20 years. So we better be ready for it. And it paid off remarkably well for the organization. Not that the pandemic didn't hurt us. We lost about 100 million in revenue because of the pandemic. But overall, everything else was so successful that we grew CSIRO's revenue by 400 million more than any other strategy. And we doubled the value that the organization produced. And it made doubling the value probably took 50 years before. So we did it in 5 through this market vision driven innovation strategy. So to say it worked is probably an understatement. It worked better than anyone expected, including me, mate. Strategy usually doesn't work that well, but we got it right, and it changed the culture of the place. It changed the way people thought. And today, when you go to CSIRO and you ask people what they're doing, instead of saying, "Oh, we do great science and we're brilliant," they say, "We're solving drought for Australia," or "We're fixing climate change," or "We're helping grow the agricultural industry." They're much more deliberate about, who's the customer, what problem are we solving, and how are we creating value by doing it. and they're still doing it by great science. The science quality, we doubled it a lot, but we couldn't make the science quality any better. It was already fantastic, but we did double the value that the place creates, which is why it grew.
What's the Larry? What's the equivalent of CSIRO in the US?
Yeah, CSIRO is an unusual beast. So there's the national labs in the US, and part of CSIRO's function is to do national labs, and CSIRO does that. There's also DARPA, which does very innovative research. Part of CSIRO is looking a bit more like DARPA now in terms of the way it does that, but it never used to, so that's sort of new. But there isn't really a CSIRO equivalent.
Okay. So
it's quite unique to Australia, and I think an unfair advantage that Australia has.
Okay. And going back earlier, what's wrong with commercialising?
Oh, look,
it's just a big mind. I understand you built the venture fund, but what's wrong with having that discussion?
Yeah, so we got a lot of stick from the climate scientists and the environmental scientists until we're able to show them that innovation is how you solve climate change. Like you got to do something different in order to fix it. And once they realized that their science was valuable too, and they could do it differently, it completely changed. Like we doubled the morale in the place. Sora measures its culture and its morale and its engagement like all companies do. We set the all-time high bar, the records for all those metrics with this strategy, because people could see, a bit like those founders in Iridex with the letters from the customers.
Yes.
They could actually see the people more grateful for what we did. The other thing that happened, the public more grateful for what we did. Sora measures its public trust every 2 years as well. And we doubled our public trust relative to where we were before historically. And that made us the most trusted brand according to a company that does Roy Morgan that does the trust survey, at least in the icons. Yeah. So
who's the client?
Mate, you are, and 25 million other Australians. And that's the difference. For CSIRO is the industrial research organisation, so we do a lot of work for industry. That's why we're created. But the environmental scientists realised actually the client's 25 million people. So can we fix drought? Can we reduce the impacts of climate change? Can we do a better job of predicting bushfires? And we measure that. Like we measure the efficacy of the things that we do now, and that tells us whether we're getting it right. And all the way back to the beginning on market vision and iterating, those environmental scientists now are fantastic at tweaking their theory, tweaking their market vision based on data that they measure in order to get it right. And I can tell you some of the work they're doing on bushfire prediction and management's extraordinary.
Okay. Interference, government. If you could change some stuff, is it, obviously they stump up and support in some regard. Is it hard yards and is it bureaucracy?
Yeah, look, I'd never done anything in government before, and I didn't have a network in government. But it's interesting. CSIRO is a separate organisation. It's got its own board. And David as chair and Simon before him really went out of their way to protect me from the political interference.
Yep.
So you need a strong chair like that.
Yep.
A lot of people do try to interfere with CSIRO, and they go through the government and they go through politics, and they're always trying to get the angle. But we sort of stubbornly stuck to our guns, and for the most part, the government of the day left us alone. I'll tell you what, though, the opposition of the day and the Greens, they gave us a hell of a hard time. Pretty much no matter what we did, there's always a huge amount of criticism of CSIRO and wanting to push it in this direction or that. And frankly, a lot of petty politics. Like I could have done without that. And I think because it didn't, the funny thing is, Greg, for all the interference and the attempted interference, it never changed what we did. It never really had a meaningful outcome. It just got a politician on the front page of the paper, which I guess was what they were trying to do. But as far as meaningful change, we stuck to our guns and sort of stubbornly succeeded in spite of them.
Okay.
But the government of the day, no, they really didn't try to interfere with us. And that was true, when Liberal was in power and when Labor was in power. I don't think I don't think they really. I think they know that they're better off letting CSIRO do what it does and deliver.
All right, you got morale up by, I think you said, an enormous number. How many people did you have to change to get there, or what did you have to do to get there?
Yeah, so CSIRO lost roughly 200 plus people a year over the decade before I got there. I mean, 30 years they lost, I think about 30% of the organisation over 30 years. So it was on a long decline. We took a hit early on. I think we moved probably 150 people out of maybe 200 in that first 2 years. And then we turned the corner, and then we grew by maybe 1,000. So we grew back about 20 years of losses in the next sort of 6 years that I was there. But that first part, still losing people, it's funny. At the time, we got on the front page of the New York Times in a really negative way, and we got a huge amount of criticism from the media for everything that we were doing. But ironically, internally, other than a small number of very vocal scientists, mostly in environmental and particularly in climate, there was one guy who was on the front page of the Sydney Morning Herald basically saying the board should be sacked and I should be sacked, that I was a con man and a crook and blah, blah. But for all that, internally, the morale was going up. And Kathy Foley said it best when she became Australia's chief scientist. Kathy was a CSIRO person, and a journalist asked her very first press club. First question was, well, tell us about all the disaster in CSIRO in 2016. And she said, actually, morale went up because we felt that we were all being treated equally for once, rather than, you're doing climate science, so you're special, so you're a sacred cow, we won't touch you. And as Kathy said, it people understood why we were doing what we were doing. And it really changed the way people thought. Once they got it in their head that we still get to do great science, but we've got to do it to solve a problem that Australians care about. We've got to be very focused on what Australia needs, not what we need as a scientist.
Okay, Larry. So how do you do that as a CEO? It's a large organisation, and I'm thinking of white coats. I'm thinking of boffins in some cases. I'm thinking, don't disturb me. I'm working on the next big invention. I don't need to hear from you. You'll be gone. You'll be gone sometime soon anyway. So how did you change all that? What's your method of communication?
Yes, it's a lot like Telstra, right? CEOs last for 5 years, and there are people that have been there for 30. They've lived through 6 CEOs, so why should they listen to you? And mate, CSIRO, like Telstra, had 55 sites around the country, and it's, by the way, one of the reasons I went to my minister and said, I want to ask David Thodey if he'd consider being the chair. And, the minister said, well, why? And I'm like, because he's done this, and I haven't. So I want to learn from him. I want someone who's done it. So it was actually that really persuaded David to do it when I went to him. Because, you always, as CEO, get a chance to put a name on a list, for the government to consider. Anyway, David was fabulous. But I went around. So CSIRO has 55 sites around the country, and that means 55 cultures. And I'm not kidding. Every site is different. The culture is different. And unless you go there and talk to people, and I'm not talking about fly in, give a speech, leave. I mean, go and spend a day and listen to them to understand what's keeping them up at night. And that took a lot of time. So I was on a plane every Monday. I was going somewhere, one of the 55 sites. But slowly over time, the word got around the organisation that actually this guy listens. He wants to learn. And I didn't make any changes for about the first 9 months. And one of the big things I learned, Greg, the people didn't trust management because they'd heard it all before. And in particular, the women didn't trust management because they'd more than heard it all before. And the diversity of the place, there are a lot of great women in CSIRO who had been looked over for promotion who were really good. And Kathy Foley was one of them. And so really understanding kind of what was wrong with the culture and then being open about it, not criticizing the place, but just, holding the mirror up to ourselves and saying, hey, this is a big problem we've got to solve. And moving the diversity, we didn't have diversity metrics. We didn't have targets. We didn't have quotas. But when we started talking about innovation, when we started talking about, hey, we've got to start solving real problems with our science, if the people that spoke up weren't necessarily the leaders at that time, they were different people, and a lot of them were women. A lot of them were non-English speaking background people. So it just sort of naturally happened that as people retired, as the organization shifted in its direction, the people that could lead it were not the usual suspects. And mate, I'll never forget, there's a couple of hallways in CSIRO where you walk down them and there's endless photos of men with beards and glasses who are the division chiefs who ran the divisions for 100 years, you know, and slowly they started to disappear. Now, I never said take them down, but the people that worked in those buildings sort of said, yeah, you know, we're not really inspiring a way of thinking differently because they look the same. So you started to see the place change. You started to see word clouds pop up on walls where people had done little innovation sessions at their site. And, you know, the culture just shifted, and it's amazing to see, but it's credit to them. It's credit to them because they knew they had to change to turn around 30 years of decline. And I would love to take credit. I've been a CEO 7 times. I've never had a scorecard like this one, but it's not me. It's not me, mate. There's some of the smartest people in the country. And once they figured out that, you know, there was a different way to do things and they were hungry to learn, they delivered in spades. They were amazing.
But did you run it like a previous company, or there's 6 others?
I did, yeah, I did. And that also was difficult.
So that means accountability, that means you can't hide?
Yeah, so CSIRO, like many government organisations, the risk is you could be a figurehead CEO.
Yes.
And you might run it more like a board, the management team's a board. It was a bit like that, which is why we changed it so much. There are also too many layers of leadership. It needed to be flatter. And better connection. And it also needed a bit of a digital transformation, because when I started there the first week, I asked Anne-Marie, my EA, I said, how do I back up my laptop? And she handed me a thumb drive. So we went through a pretty quick digital transformation into the cloud in about 2015, which is quite a nice journey. But mate, yeah, I probably did run it more like a startup. Yeah. Certainly the CEO before I got there was called, you know, Dr. Clark, Dr. Marshall. I'm Larry. And today Doug is called Doug. He's not called, Dr. Doug or whatever. And that was a big change, but if you want, to be a good leader, you've got to have people willing to follow you. You've got to have followership. And it's hard for them to follow you if you're an ethereal professor type in a black limousine. You know, kind of got to be accessible and a bit more like one of them. And honestly, the journey, I had a few of the CSIRO scientists, both young and old, tell me afterwards, you know, we realized sort of halfway through that you were kind of taking us on the journey that you had been on yourself back in Silicon Valley in the 80s and 90s and 2000s, and that kind of made it real, kind of made it authentic, because it wasn't like I was espousing a strategy that I hadn't actually lived, you know. So
Larry, how do you decide where you're going to spend the bucks? So as you said earlier, you went back to, you know, what makes a entrepreneur successful in Silicon Valley was not the big wide base, it's the singular focus. Now so, you know, how did you crowd and say, I'm sorry, fellas, or ladies, I'm not going down that path. This is where we're going to spend the time and effort.
Yeah. So firstly, we structured the organization into market verticals, not like the way labs and unis are structured. It's by academic discipline, you know, science, chemistry, math, you know. We structured into agriculture and mining and manufacturing. And so we brought in people from other parts of the organization who had worked in those industries outside, and they suddenly became valuable because they understood the problems in those markets. And then we essentially did a deep dive one by one And it took a lot of time, like took a couple of years to grind through this. But we did deep dives with the people who funded the research, our customers. We went out into the market, and we spent a lot of time in huddles internally figuring out that market vision for agriculture, for manufacturing, for health. And it was that market vision that set the course of where we invested. And then every year we tweak the investment plan. And that was probably another big change. CSIRO used to get a budget and everyone had an expectation of what they'd get, and it didn't change very much. We changed every year, sometimes quite substantially, where we thought we were going to get the best return, where we'd get there a bit quicker. So sometimes we'd accelerate funding on a project if we thought we could nail it. Hydrogen was a good example of that. We also did a net zero plan for the whole country, and we kind of mapped out how would we get rid of emissions from the really hard to abate sectors, and we invested in those areas, and that's the reason you're seeing hydrogen start to take off in different parts of Australia, because that was one of the visions that the environmental team had around if we need another fuel.
Any surprises, any stories there that blew you away?
Well, the biggest one is how well the team did, despite everything, despite the noise and the media and the politics and all the rest of it. And it's bloody hard. Yeah. But I'm surprised it works so well, because you don't often see that. And the caliber of the people that are in the place, sort of unleashed was, there's a lot of pushing to get it started, but once it got started, I couldn't stop them. They're on a roll, and ultimately that was the reason I was really soul searching, because the government tried to get me to sign on for a longer third term, okay. And I was really reluctant, because I reckon CEOs have a use by date, and I didn't want to be part of the problem. So they tried to talk me into sign, and I talked them down to only to one more 3-year term, and that was it. And I set a really hard date, and everyone in the organisation knew it. I think a lot of people thought I wouldn't leave, but as we got closer and closer, people realised. But that was important, because they needed to know that there was an end date, and they also knew what I wanted to accomplish by that date. So doubling the value of the organisation was a goal that we set internally. I never thought in a million years we'd pull it off, but we did it, and it's entirely credit to them.
So what was the last day like, Larry?
Oh, really sad. Sad and happy, bittersweet, mate, bittersweet. And the thing that surprised me, Greg, was for the 6 months before I left, I kept finding these little notes under my door or in my inbox, or I get an email from someone or a little gift, and it really is like a family in many ways. And people were crying, when I talked to them, and like it was. I was surprised there was so much emotion, because I can tell you the emotion was the other way in my first year. So it's amazing how much it changed. But it's it becomes part of you. So I'll always think of CSIRO as my CSIRO. I'll always feel connected to it, and even now, when I hear a business development opportunity from industry, I'll always pass it along to the organisation to make sure they chase it up. And that's another thing, really. You can't be a CEO unless you've carried a bag, unless you've gone out and worked with customers and sold product, and I think that never leaves you. I think that's just always part of who you are.
Look, just on that, now your period at Stanford and the exposure to business, and the reason why the States excels, and probably the same in Israel. Where's the relationship between business and the universities in Australia?
Yeah, so that's what we were talking about at the beginning, wasn't it? It's actually in this.
Want to put it up again? There we go. Invention to innovation.
Yeah, I was just thinking we've gone through. It's got 8 chapters, and I think we've done all of them. but in here, we talk about the valley of death, and think I mentioned it earlier. If you think of academic excellence on this side, and you think of revenue on this side,
yep.
The valley is sort of the gap in between. And unfortunately, to get really excellent science from an academic standpoint, the technology readiness, you know about TRL?
No, what's that mean?
So there's a measure. There's a measure that NASA use, and most industry use it now. Technology readiness sort of goes from 0 to 10. So 0 is an idea, 10 is a product.
Okay.
In the market that works. So the lower the technology readiness, then the more new and unique the idea. And in general, the academia tends to reward that kind of thinking, those kind of inventions, and it doesn't tend to reward commercialization. And industry, of course, doesn't really want to invest in an idea. They want to invest in a company or a product. So every country has the valley, but in Australia, it's much wider and deeper. And the reason it's deeper is we don't have as much venture capital as other countries, notwithstanding the fact that it has gone through a blip.
Yes.
So it has grown a lot. But that venture capital tends not to go into scientific type innovation. So, Atlassian, incredibly successful digital company.
Yes.
Canva, incredibly successful digital company, didn't need science or a great invention from science to make them successful. That tends to be where the money's going. Nanosonics did need an invention from science, and it did manage to convince one VC to invest in them, and that got them going. But for every one successful Nanosonics, there's a whole bunch of others that couldn't get funding. So that's part of our challenge. And equally, Australian industry historically has been very reluctant to lean in and invest in university level tech. That's changing too. So since I've been chairing the Innovation Council at Fortescue, I've seen that company do a lot more risk taking with sort of universities and CSIRO actually, and that's been kind of pleasing to see. And to be fair, I think the other mining companies, Rio and BHP, are starting to take a little bit more risk as well, because they're realizing, I think, that to get to net zero, mining's our hardest sector to abate by far. So they're realizing they're going to have to take more risk, I think, in order to get there.
But look, what's Israel? 6 to 8 million people, 1,000+ startups or more per annum, or something like that. So let me ask you a hypothetical. Magic wand, you're PM for a period of time. Do we have the right incentives in this country to excite people to take the risk? Do we give them enough support to do so in terms of tax breaks? Where are we in that regard? Because there's got to be something we're missing.
Yeah. So CSIRO is a bit of a microcosm of Australia. It's spread out all across the country, 55 sites. It's got the same emissions profile as Australia. It had the same innovation problem as the rest of Australia. So I'd argue that following the strategy that we followed at CSIRO would be a good gamble for the government to do in order to shift the innovation performance. And the reason I say that, CSIRO became so Thomson Reuters rank globally all the most innovative companies, and every year they come out with a list of the top 25 most innovative companies in the world by sector. In about 2018, CSIRO made its way onto that list. For the first time ever, an Australian entity had been ranked, had made it into the top 25. Before we finished, we'd beaten NASA on that list. We're higher up the list than NASA.
Congratulations!
It's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
So I think that's pretty good evidence that that innovation strategy could work. That could pull Australia up that list. And really, there were three things that we did. One was the culture, shifting from invention to innovation. The other one was this thing called the ON program, where we taught about 4,000 scientists kind of took them on the journey that I went on as a young scientist. Like how do you block and tackle innovation? How do you understand how to turn an invention into impact? And then the final one was the missions program. So Europe has this national missions program that spends about $3 billion of government money on solving big wicked challenges. So it's a similar idea: solve a big challenge. The difference for the missions that we created in CSIRO, we use the market vision to pick the challenge. So we're really granular, really specific, like a startup would be. What product are we going to create to solve that problem? But instead of going to government did not fund missions like they did in Europe. We went out to the industries that had the problem, and we managed to bring the funding in from industry. And I think there's a lesson in that. I think Australia could do a lot more of that mission-style research, but not go to government for the money. Instead, get industry behind the missions. And why did Australian industry invest? Because that's the other half of the Valley of Death. How were we able to draw them in? They saw the success that CSIRO was having in creating value, and they felt like, okay, maybe that's worth investing in. And so it was sort of, they'll have a crack. And so I think that strategy writ large could actually move the needle for Australia's innovation performance.
All right, Larry. Now you changed a different part of your life. You moved into the boardroom, and you've done private equity backed boards, startup boards. You're now on ASX listed boards, but you've also been exposed to US type boards. What do you see the differences, and what do you see the strengths?
So I think Australia, I believe, is world class at governance. I think we have the best governance in the world, and the way the rigor and the process. I'm really in awe of that. So I think we are better than Silicon Valley at that. But where we might have a bit of a blind spot, and remember, when you're on a venture-backed board, the VCs can be very aggressive. It's not a comfortable environment. It's pretty aggressive. It's pretty challenging. But at the same time, that pressure, it takes pressure to create a diamond. That pressure and that sense of urgency is what drives innovation. So I think our opportunity is to balance our governance excellence with innovation and risk-taking excellence. And what I've seen lately, and Catherine Livingston does this better than anyone I've ever seen, Catherine uses the governance framework to actually take more risk, to actually increase the risk that the company is taking. And David does it too, and others do it. But Catherine's the one I've seen up really close, who's got a real gift for doing this. So I think we're on the right track there. I think the boardroom's on the right track. Where we're probably a bit behind, we don't see many STEM professionals on boards in Australia, and the future is going to be driven by artificial intelligence and quantum computing and space technology. It's going to get harder and harder for directors in the boardroom to make the right call in the heat of the moment if they don't have someone around the table who can actually speak to the technical detail. You can have a consultant come in, you can have the CTO come in, but there's no substitute. Those times where it's just the board and you're around the table and you're really wrestling with a hard issue. It's very powerful when you can cut through. And I guess the example I think of that, like being on the board of Fortescue, this is a big company, almost 20,000 people, ASX 10, and they had the epiphany that when they wanted to be more than a mining company, when they wanted to get into technology and clean energy, they didn't have all the right people around the table, and so they did a long search. And last year, I got tapped after a number of interviews and everything else to join the board. And it's fascinating. It's a big company, but the board, it's still less than 10 people, which I think is a magic number. Like more than 10, it's too many. You can't, it operates. The board members roll their sleeves up and they really wrestle the issues with management in an incredibly productive way. But again, at the end, there's always a time where the board is sitting around the table, and I can't tell you how many times I've had to lob in and say, well, AI does this or quantum does that, or there's a material issue there, or whatever it is, and help the board, if nothing else, help them regulate the risk. But often it's help them be willing to take the risk because the upside is strong enough and we can quantify the risk. So I think there's a lot in that. And I think Australian boards are sort of a bit behind. US boards have figured this out. I don't think Australian boards have yet, but that's where we need to head.
Do we need to meet as many times as we do?
You know,
if I was a CEO, I'd be a bit tired of putting the board packs getting the team to do it so many times as we do in Australia. Or maybe I'm wrong. I don't, but the Americans don't seem to do it 4 times a year. The UK is 6 to 8, and Australia is off we go. Let's start around 9 and keep going up.
Yeah, so 1 a quarter is a good number. Coincides with the financials. All that's good. But I actually like the meetings in between the quarters where you're not so worried about those issues. I find them where you do some of your best creative thinking. So I chair this thing in Fortescue called the Innovation Council, and it meets about every 6 weeks, and it's all about trying to keep our arms around all the innovation going on across the company, from metals to energy to technology, and try and manage the risk, manage the profile, make sure we're not missing opportunity, and that's great. I really like that, and I think CommBank may have something similar to that too. Actually, I think there's a couple of Australian companies who are realizing that innovation is something that can be, the board need to get across. In CSIRO, we actually created an innovation subcommittee, or science excellence and innovation subcommittee. David drove the creation of that for a similar reason. Just get your arms around everything that's going on so that you can understand the risk and optimize it.
So do we encourage creativity enough here? We encourage process a lot. Do we encourage creativity just in business in general from your lens?
It's hard. We tend to be better fast followers than creators. But having said that, then look at Canva. Who thought? I remember an early investor, an early fund manager, we were trying to persuade. So Blackbird, one of the first investors into Canva.
Yes.
We're trying to persuade a big institution to go in, and they said, "What? You guys are competing with PowerPoint with Microsoft? Are you crazy?" And that is very conventional wisdom. They were crazy, but sometimes crazy works. So, Atlassian, similar story. No one thought that they could do it, but they did. So, I think having an entrepreneur on your board, having someone with STEM skills, having someone who's lived in a different, in startup land, I think that's very powerful in the era that we're going into now, where technology and startups are so disruptive. That's the other thing, Greg. It's, Nokia owned the phone business,
yes,
until Apple took it off them, and they never saw it coming. I think our competitors, it's not going to be enough to be a fast follower in the future. I think our competitors are coming from other sectors completely that we're not even aware of. So, I think boards have a hard job of really keeping across all that.
So if you're looking back, Larry, when you're sitting there 6 times and you're facing it and running out of cash, or you're doing your IPO, or you come back to Australia and take over CSIRO and turn that around, what's leadership, Larry?
Yeah. Leadership's all about them.
Probably in your book, chapter something, is it?
It is. But I think too many leaders think it's all about them, and really it's not about you. It's about the people you're leading. And one of the most important things for anyone who's trying to lead innovation is to create a culture where your people aren't afraid to tell you the things that they think you might not want to hear. Because, people have got to feel comfortable to tell you, Larry, you got it wrong, or you missed this, or you missed that. if you can truly have that where you're not going to get, your ego's not going to get in the way, you're going to listen to them, then together you'll always plot a better path than you will alone. And that's something a lot of people talk about Andrew. One of his gifts, and he'll tell you, I'm only right about half the time. And when you see him in action, when you see one of his people question him, and I've seen CEOs of ASX 10 companies questioned who didn't like being questioned by their people. Nobody likes it, but he listens. And he doesn't, they don't get crucified for saying, I think you're wrong. He wants to hear that. And that is a strength. That's an amazing strength. And you don't see it very much, but that to me is the secret. For me, in CSIRO, that was the secret. Make sure everyone knew that I would listen, and if I was wrong, we would change course. That's probably the final part about leadership. Go back to the market vision. You've got your vision of the future, and you keep iterating. You keep listening to the market. You keep tweaking your product. You keep changing things until you get to success.
Yep.
And when people look back on it, they go, "Oh my God, how did you create this amazing product? No one would have ever thought of that." Well, we thought of it in a series of steps, and we weren't afraid to say we were wrong. We weren't afraid to change course. Sometimes leadership in Australia, particularly in government, they're a little bit too much like the kangaroo and the emu. They can't take a backward step.
Yeah.
And sometimes you got to step back in order to go sideways to go forward, And you really learn that as an entrepreneur, and you're not afraid of that.
Well, and if you're going to select your top team, what are the core characteristics you personally pick?
Diversity. Diverse people. People have completely different backgrounds, people who think differently, younger, older, gender, culture, as diverse as you can get, because it's innovation doesn't have a compass other than people willing to think differently about the future. And so the more diverse your team is, the more likely you are to hit on the insight you need to be successful.
What's next, Larry?
Mate, I don't think Australia can be Silicon Valley, and I don't think it should be Israel, but Canada. So Canada's about the same size, got a very similar economy. Roughly 40% of Canadian companies are driven by innovation from science. In Australia, it's about 1%, maybe a bit less. So I would love to see us become as good as Canada. I reckon that would be an amazing accomplishment for Australia. And so for me, working with companies that are willing to do that, are willing to chase that goal, that's why I'm here. That's what I really like to do. So bringing more startup, more STEM, more innovation to Australia's companies, big and small, so that we can actually deliver on that vision. So that instead of being in 72nd in the world for innovation, we're in the top 10. I'd love to see that happen in my lifetime.
And Larry, if you were to look back at that young man like myself watching telly in the black and white and Julius Sumner Miller, what advice would you give him now?
Yeah. I'd probably say the worst moments in your life, the worst down points, the part where you think you're not going to survive, are actually the catalysts of your success. And when you look back on it years later, it'll look like, as you join the dots, everything was meant to be. It'll look like it all worked out perfectly, but it only looks that way because of those crisis points that woke you up, got you to focus, and made you successful. And, I felt pretty sorry for myself as a young kid. My dad died when I was 10. I fell off a cliff when I was 14 and almost died. But when I look back on it, they were the defining moments, because the crisis made me think differently about the future. And those near-death experiences in the startups, it's the same thing. So those things, as painful as they are, you had to have them in order to find success. And, people talk about failure in entrepreneurship. You have to have the failure to catalyze success. They're yin and yang.
On that, Larry, thank you for joining us today. It's been a terrific show.
Greg, it's been a real pleasure, and mate, I love talking to you. You've got such a great vision of Australia, and you're not afraid to ask the hard questions. So God bless you.
Thanks a lot, Larry. On that, you've been listening to No Limitations.